Thank you everyone for sticking around. This is probably the most interesting conversation we're going to have all afternoon, because we're going into politics, migration, and every single thing that every politician dreads to talk about because it never makes anyone happy. The storylines are difficult, but at some point the political implications have been quite clear. We're talking in our last session, which we will keep to time because we have a hard stop and we all have to leave the venue for very important things to happen in this wonderful building at 5 o'clock. So this afternoon we're talking about migration. The title is quite clear, an adaptation strategy with political implications. This is basically asking the impossible of these wonderful people who have decided to share their expertise, because people are moving, but where are they moving to? Within countries, across borders, is it across continents? It's not always about climate disruption. It's a strategy that really comes down to survival and adaptations, but it brings with us a whole bunch of issues that are complex both economically and politically. So to introduce this panel very quickly, so we can jump straight into the conversation, is Panu Poutvaara. He is director at the IFO Center for Migration and Development Economics at the IFO Institute. Not an easy job. Congratulations on being given like a really tough portfolio. Ibrahima Amadou is the director of the African Center for the Study and Research on Migration for the African Union. Thank you very much for joining us. Orlane Maincent is the Humanitarian Program Development, Migration and Climate Change Disaster IOM at the UN Migration. And Francesco Luciani is the head of unit at the Migration and Forced Displacement at DG INTPA of the European Commission. Thank you very much for coming and joining this afternoon's session. If I can jump straight into the biggest question that we have, and I want to start with you, Ibrahima, because we always look at it from a European perspective. Where is the migration happening? Is it a migration into Europe? Is this all about climate? When it comes to the African Union, what is the data telling you about migration patterns and adaptation? You switched it off. Is it on now?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share ideas and thoughts about climate change and this migration. So first of all, migration is very complex, and it underlines various dimensions: economic, social, political, environmental, cultural, etc. So I would say that migration is not only fundamentally driven by climate change. Also, climate change is one of the key factors, but it's better to have, a better understanding of migration as a result of a combination of various factors. Because most of migrants actually, even if they are facing climate change, they move fundamentally for social, economic, and political reasons. So that's why it's difficult, to have policies that are only focused on climate change. It's rather to have a comprehensive approach in order to deal with not only the climate change implications, but also the social, economic, and political issues underlying migration.
When you look at the African Union data, where are people migrating to?
Actually, most fundamentally, African migration is intra rather than extra-continental. So according to the international media coverage and some also rhetoric, African migration is only, what we see in the media, like people moving from Africa to the global north. But the reality of data shows that 80% of African migrants, they move within the African continent. So it has several implications as far as climate change is concerned, because most of the migrants that are affected by climate change are forcibly displaced persons, because migration driven by climate change, environmental degradation also goes along with also conflict and also issues related to political instability. And so there is a fundamental need to consider the nexus between forced displacement and climate change. So the data shows really that African migration is very complex. And we tend also to overlook the internal migration, I mean, within the countries, with, people from rural areas moving to the capital city or to the towns. It has also several implications in terms of urban planning, in terms also of access to social welfare. And many countries also, they don't have the financial capacities to address also this internal migration, which should, in my sense, be considered also in the policy making. So there is a fundamental need also to consider also this demographic dividend with increasing youth population in Africa, which has also implication as far as migration is concerned, whether internal migration or international migration.
Well, now if I can ask you to jump in and give us a perspective from the UN perspective about migration. We keep on our television sets from our politicians who like to use it as a bit of a beating drum of all of these routes that migrants are taking. It's almost like sounds like a war on the seas in the Mediterranean. What do you see on the ground in terms of realities, and what exactly has been done from your perspective to kind of mitigate that to an extent?
Thanks for the question. First of all, let me say that it would be very convenient for me today as IOM to say that yes, environmental migrants are moving to Europe, which wouldn't be true. It would be very convenient because that would mean that we would get funding to address the phenomenon, which is not such an obvious phenomenon, unfortunately. I'm working currently on Libya, and you are all very well aware that there are lots of deaths in the Mediterranean of migrants trying to cross through what we call the central Mediterranean route, from the Sahel, passing through Libya or Tunisia towards Europe. It's really hard to tell among those migrants which ones are environmental migrants, simply because there is not such a category. In environmental migrations is a combination of different factors, as it was said previously. In Libya, I would say that most of those who cross the sea do so because they are forced, not because they intended, when leaving their country, to cross the Mediterranean. It's simply because initially these are economic migrants who moved to Libya because there are historically lots of jobs in Libya. Gas industry, agriculture, etc. Then, very often, they find themselves stuck in a loop of trafficking, of exploitation, and have no other choice but to take a boat and cross. So this is the first misconception I would like to address today. Environmental migration is a much more silent and invisible phenomenon because, as my colleague rightly said, it happens within borders. There is no way to say for sure how many environmental migrants there are, simply because there is no way to observe the phenomenon. What we can do is try in our data analysis and data collection to include some indicators related to the environment, but it will never be taken for granted because it's associated with many other factors: security, culture, political, economy, level of developments, etc. Most of the environmental migration is first a seasonal or a circular migration. Talking about Libya once again, Niger, Libya, there is clearly a circular phenomenon, for instance, for Nigerian. During the wet season, they will cultivate the field. During the dry season, they will go up north, try to find employment as workers in Libyan fields, in the gas industry, etc. What's true, however, is that this historical circular migration, because it's absolutely not a new phenomenon, it's been going on for decades, centuries. It's been listed in countries' literature, etc. What's changing, as it was said previously in the second panel, is how rapidly the weather is changing. So people do adapt, but the weather changes too much for them to be able to catch up somehow. So they tend to move further and for longer periods of time. So where they used to go maybe a decade ago, then became also a territory that is affected by climate change. Therefore, they have to move further, and they have also to stay for longer periods of time, because the wet season, the one that is productive in the fields back home, is also reduced in time. So these are maybe a few misconceptions to address to understand really what's happening when we talk about environmental migration. And one last thing I would like to say, we need to be very, very careful with data collection. Panel 1 and Panel 2 rightly talked about data. Without data, we can't do much. Data collection, when it comes to environmental migration, is extremely challenging. But also, we need to be very careful about language. And since we started this session early in the day, we had the debates around mitigation, adaptation, which words should we use? We need to think that the population who are affected by climate change, who are on the front line, don't really understand this lingo that we're using. And even if we use translators, they're sometimes, or even very often, unable to translate these words simply because in the language, in the culture, they don't exist. So when we will do, I don't know, focus group discussions, data collections with populations affected, we don't necessarily speak about the same thing. Sometimes the word doesn't even exist. Sometimes drought will be translated into God's action. It happens. So we have to be very careful about this and think that we cannot just transfer our model of understanding to the populations who are on the front line of climate change.
Thank you for clearing that up for us. So Panu, I'm going to ask you, data. What is the data painting as a picture? Because at some point, both of them have now highlighted that climate migration is very different from the total number of migrants that we look at, and that line gets blurred in the politics of it all and in the news of it all. What's the data telling us?
So migration is usually driven by a combination of different factors. So there is the economic factors, then it comes to migrants coming from Africa or Middle East to Europe, then there is also conflict, and there are environmental factors, and often the environmental factors are aggravating economic problems or conflict, and in that way, then people are asked, we have done one analysis in which we looked what people who have come to Europe across the Mediterranean 2015-2016 gave us their main reason to come, and then only 2% answered natural disasters or other reasons. Most people refer to conflict or economic reasons. But I wouldn't conclude from this that climate change is only playing a very small part, because it's also that if those people who came because of, say, economic reasons, if it was because of drought, then it could be very well be that it was because of climate change or it was worsened by climate change. So to sum up, climate change definitely plays an important role, but it's very difficult to quantify because it's interacting with so many other factors.
Francesco, if it's so difficult to quantify and separate out the data when it comes to migration and the reasons behind the migration, when you look at the policies of the Commission and then member states, how do you translate that? How do you view it? Do you think they reflect the understanding of experts like these who are actually speaking to a lot of these migrants coming in? Do you think your policies are good enough at this point? The alt-right would say no.
Many thanks for the challenging question. I think I should first of all start from the data and say that still it remains important to invest on data, and that's the first thing that we do, and we have also actions on the ground to support indeed the collection of data and the analysis of the relation between the data that one may collect and phenomena, because the connection is not evident. I mean, the causality connection is absolutely not evident. Among the actions that we have launched recently is a support to the IDMC the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, and to build capacities, because it's about building capacity of local and national actors, first of all. Of course, we need to have the broader vision and to collect all the data, but first of all, we want that every responsible authority, be that a local, national, or regional level, be able to monitor what's happening on the territory, on the broader region. Because it's also very much about the planning of policies at local level, thinking that we are the central tower of the planet and it's us that are going to mastermind everything. It's, of course, very naive. I mean, we need to build the capacities of those that, in a way, have to administer and manage and prevent or adjust. And that's what we're trying to do, together with plenty of others, of course. And to try to see also the connection, as I said, that's very important. In terms of policies, I mean, I need, of course, to squeeze complex reasoning in a few words. I would say that we have evolved from a drama phase in which, indeed, there was this idea of floods reaching the EU, and the question was, should we expand the Geneva Convention on refugees in order to give hospitality in this revised convention also to the climate refugees, the forbidden world, etc., into something different. We are in a different phase, I would say. First of all, because it's widely recognized, I think, that indeed, as has been said, the displacement or the migration, we tend increasingly to speak about mobility, because indeed the dividing line, although we recognize that there are components that are very much displacement and others that are much more migration, so with a willingness component, it's largely an internal displacement phenomenon. So we should not think in defensive terms towards us. It's more an issue that strikes partners, I would say. Secondly, also that it's very much also a phenomenon of course, there are quick events, disaster, natural disaster, but also there is a slow motion, and eventually, it's very much about growing cities, because in the end, most of the people does the first movement from rural areas towards cities. So it's very much also a question of how to address the growing urbanization, crowded and disorderly, without social services, without planning, etc. So we are in another phase in which we try to mainstream, first of all, this consideration in all the things we do, with increasing connection between actions specifically on Green Deal, on energy, on green energy, etc., into and actions related to migration, to social affairs in general. We try to connect to connect all the dots.
So I know you've been piloting some kind of mobility partnerships, small-scale relocation programs with, say, small islands in the Pacific, and trying that. Kind of explain to me how you will tie in a climate mobility situation into the European adaptation policy, because at some point all of these policies have to work together, don't they? If you're trying out partnerships, is that an optionality to negate this rhetoric that there are seas and oceans of migrants coming? We are testing various ways. And again, it's not about people to Europe. It's very much, first of all, there. We have piloted the projects, for instance, in the Pacific Islands a few years ago, at least to help them to create plans to prevent or adapt themselves. We are, for instance, supporting, we are still to sign the contract with IOM and others for 100 million euros action. I don't know whether it's still fair to speak about pilot, on basically all the southern Africa below the equator, to see at almost each and every country in that broader region, with a particular attention also to the eastern part of that broader region, to help them to plan and also to see what's possible in terms of prevention, adaptation, relocation in some cases. And similar actions are in the pipeline for Bangladesh, for instance, in other parts of South Asia. But also other smaller actions, for instance, promoting
the use of migrant remittances or other tools for climate resilience agriculture, for instance. So we try to address the phenomenon from various angles in order to make the partners more resilient, able to prevent or to go through more smoothly to social or economic crises that will be generated or will be worsened by this climate, but also environmental degradation, more broadly speaking, because it's not just about climate change. Sometimes it's also about misuse of environment or incapacity really to plan the use of environment. So I think this is what we are trying to do, at least from the angle of someone that speaks on behalf of Directorate General International Partnership, to support partners to have the tools, and first of all, to put this in their mind, in their radar screen, in order to see the problems in advance.
If I can ask you, Orlane, and also Ibrahima, where's the missing link then? Because if they're trying so hard to really address all of these partners and address the problem at source, it's maybe not working because you have the human traffickers who are still very much around. You still have people looking at the optionality of potentially being economic migrants. So what is the missing link that can help them support partners where you work better?
I don't think it's about a missing link. I think it's about an angle. And there are so many angles we can approach the issue with that it makes it a bit confusing somehow. At IOM, when we talk about environmental migration, we say we design population to move, we design solutions for people to stay, and we design population for people on the move. So it really shows that it's a continuum. It's not only looking at people going from A to B because A is not livable anymore. It's much more complicated than that. Helping people to stay, meaning that migration as a positive adaptation strategy, because I don't think anybody here is able to say migration is not an adaptation strategy. It is. The difference would be, is it a successful one or is it a negative one? To make it positive, there needs to be an element of choice. Somebody who's forced to move will do so in a very vulnerable ways, and his options and his chances to succeed are very low. So we design solutions for people to stay, meaning if the person decides to move, it's because the territory where he or she is living is not viable anymore. And it happens. There are a lot in the Pacific, there are a lot in Asia, in Africa, etc. So examples are there. Some people don't want to move because they're too attached to the land, and even though they are hit by cyclones on a monthly basis almost, or on a seasonal basis, and that happens a lot. In India, for instance, in the Bay of Bengal, there are villages that are totally emptied from men. There are only women remaining, children and elderly. Those who couldn't move, or those who refused to move, stay there and are surviving as they can. So that's a reality. And these ones are losing the game of adaptation, that's for sure. We design solutions for people on the move, meaning that migration in the context of environmental migration is not only moving from A to B, full stop. It's a lot of recurring mobility patterns that will happen over years, even over decades. When you interview migrants who reached Europe or who are still in Africa or in Asia, you'll see that they didn't have a destination in mind and they didn't move from A to B. They move from a place first that is near their house, they're looking for jobs, it works for a few weeks, and then the market is saturated, there is no other option, they move further and further and further, up to the point, and it happens, that they're not able to come back or not willing to come back. So that's a reality as well. It's not as easy as one-way movement. And for people to stay, meaning that, for people to integrate in areas of destination, meaning that there is possibilities for win-win scenarios. There are labor shortages that these migrants are able to address. And there is increasingly, I think, a recognition from some states that these migrants can contribute to the economy locally. And for that, for instance, we're working with the European Union on bilateral labor agreements, for instance. And that's the case, again, about, for instance, Libya and Niger. there is need for labor in the fields in Libya, and you have the Nigerian migrants who are willing to go and work on a seasonal basis. So there are lots of potentialities. The question is not about recognizing migration as an adaptation strategy. It's about reducing the risks associated to it, making sure that it becomes a positive adaptation strategy and not a negative one. And the difference will be in our capacity, as international actors, to jump in and support where needed. And again, there are many, many different ways to enter into that topic. And that's also maybe why it feels like it's missing links. It's not missing links. It's just work in progress.
And it's a work in progress. So Ibrahima, if I can ask you, it's a work in progress. You are gathering data. You are gathering information that is relevant to the African Union. How can that help Francesco do his job better in the data you can share? And what do you need from him in terms of the data that you can use in a better way to kind of predict the movement of people, to kind of help both sides formulate policies in a world that is changing so fast, as established by all our speakers today?
Thank you very much for this very challenging question, because it's very difficult to predict human mobility, because human mobility is driven by structural conditions, but also human mobility also can be driven by choice, in the sense that people may move not necessarily because of conflict, of natural disasters. They may move also to strengthen their intellectual capital, for family reunification, for, in order also to have access to the international labor market opportunities. So it is fundamental to first consider the complexity of migration trends and patterns, whether it is internal or international migration. As far as the African Center for the Study and Research on Migration is concerned, our fundamental objective is to, change the African migration narratives, because migration, first of all, is a universal phenomenon, is an anthropological and universal phenomenon. It is not a recent phenomenon. People have been moving, since the beginning of humankind, and it has been, the driving force of human civilization. We have been migrants, we were migrants, we will be migrants. So it's very important that we consider migration from this standpoint, otherwise we may come up with misleading policies. Regarding data, we value, understanding migration by taking into account several layers, and we also want to have an intersectional approach of migration, because if you want to understand why climate change or an environmental degradation are driving migration, you need also to understand why the interlocking of various vulnerabilities also makes some people vulnerable to climate change and some other people not vulnerable to climate change. So the issue of access to capitals is fundamental, because people who have access to social economic capital move more freely, and even mobility capital in the sense that there are people who have more facilities to move internationally. Those people, they will be more resilient as far as climate change is concerned. People who have challenges to have access to social economic capital and even mobility capital, they may face a lot of hardships in order to not only move but to cope with this.
And are you able to share that data with Francesco's team so that they are more aware? Because data, as you said when you sat down, is critical. How smooth is the data sharing between your organization and international organizations that are basing policies where their funding is going, where the action's going? How much of that data sharing is happening, and how accurate is it?
No, data sharing is a problem in the sense that data are very sensitive, and there are legal implications also for data sharing. But we should share data when they are reliable, accurate, and timely. So the center is a continental institution, so we rely on the African Union for budget, for leadership, etc. But we want to be a kind of international or global platform when it comes to African migration. So we work in close conjunction with all the experts and researchers on migration. And then in this sense, we have developed the African Migration Journal, where people can share their research findings, their data on migration. We also share data and findings through our publication series, the African Migration Policy Brief, the African Migration Working Paper series. So sharing data, I think, is very important, but there is a need also to have, common paradigms. Otherwise, it will be difficult to have this synergy in terms of collaboration, because, as I said, there's a need to reinvent, the narrative on migration, because migration is not only negative; it has also positive aspects. Countries like United States have been developed because of migration. So,
and no one would argue that, perhaps, except this particular new administration in Washington, where the walls are going up. So if I can ask you, Panu, the political will at this point is that migrants, the use of language, the use of the descriptor, it reminds me of arguments that were done during Brexit about who is making money and who is taking benefits, and anybody who was the loudest could get away with any figure that could be thrown out there, a bit like our current administration in Washington. What kind of data can we put out there in terms of storytelling to say the political will should back this and not just use migration as a bully stick that can scare people saying, well, hang on a minute. How do we use the data that you're collecting, the reports you're making, to convince politicians?
Very good question. When it comes to Brexit, for example, there are some economists who
I'm still sore about it. I'm sorry, I had to bring that up.
We are also very sad about it and wish you back. So that's but that is kind of that was an example of a very unfortunate disruption that was largely driven by negative perceptions of immigration that were largely incorrect, because, for example, if it comes to the migrants who came to the UK from Poland and other Eastern European countries, they were net contributors to the UK public funding finances. So actually the local population gained from migration, and also in terms of they were work migrants, they were often temporarily or for a few years and then went back, meaning that they would not even use the healthcare services once retiring. So it was an example of really misleading argumentation.
But we're seeing that misleading argument happen again about migrants coming from different parts of the world, and how climate adaptation will mean a lesser lifestyle for Europeans, and that is what's being pitched on political platforms across Europe at this point. What is the data actually telling us about those migrants that are coming in now, even if I put my soreness of Brexit aside?
I think that it is a complicated situation, because a lot, if we ask what are the economic effects of immigration on the host countries, it depends on how successfully migrants are integrated into the labor market and also on the social protection system of those countries that they are staying. So even for, I would, given also the Brexit experience, like to say that yes, everybody is going to gain. It's not necessarily the case. So that if we have a situation in which a host country has a high unemployment rate and there are no jobs available, then it can happen that migrants who come, say, from Africa would be net beneficiaries from income redistribution and would not be able to integrate into the labor market. If a country is able to integrate them into the labor market and provide jobs, then they can be net contributors to public finances, and then both the migrants and the host countries could gain. So then it comes to policies. What we need are policies that would allow migrants to integrate. I think it's unrealistic to say that we would have completely open borders to everybody to come, so that it is something that host countries have a right to regulate labor migration, and the challenge is how to do it in the way that host countries would gain. Migrants would of course gain themselves, otherwise they would not come, but ideally how also the countries of origin could gain, how migration could serve as a catalyst to development in the origin countries. And that could be the case, for example, thanks to remittances, or if people come to work for a few years in Europe and perhaps then go back with additional knowledge they have accumulated.
So the European Commission is actually on the right track in the way it's approaching migration. So, Francesco, the question then, because we are a little bit short on time, is at some point, this is a very politicized issue. How much pressure do you feel when you're coming up with recommendations, when you're coming up and talking to different national governments that are pushing back very strongly? Because Germany, for example, that is a favorite beating horse of certain parties that gained traction on the basis of migration. So when you're looking at your policies now, you know you're on the right track, but you're getting pushback from the politicians who finally make the decisions. Or are you not getting the pushback? Is life really easy right now?
But first of all, the European Commission is not doing this alone. It's doing with the European Union, with the member states, and also in close contact with the United Nations and all like-minded partners. Not everyone thinks like us, we know it, but we are many. Secondly, I don't know whether we are on the right track, but we are trying to do the best we can, knowing that it's not simple, we should be cold-minded and as comprehensive and balanced as possible. I can reassure that we are not just trying to address the root causes, but we also do plenty of other things. We protect the refugees, we fight against the migrant smugglers, we do border surveillance, we do plenty of things. We do all the panoply of the things. So it's more complex than that. And as has been said, it's ongoing. I mean, we cannot already say it fails, it's a success. You have to stay in contact with the reality and know that you will have to do 100 adjustments. We will need money. We will need also to be strong in the field, because sometimes money is not enough, because you can address the root causes and then arrive a civil war and everyone is fragilized again. So it's a cocktail of plenty of things that, by the way, have to be built and cannot be built in one night. For instance, we are entering into the preparation of the next multi-annual financial framework. Let's see how much money do we put in the common pot. Let's see what kind of instruments we will give to ourselves. Let's see what kind of rules we are going to give to ourselves, whether to do a project we will need 1 year, as we do today, or shorter time, or with more flexible tools. You see, so everything then is connected. When arrives the moment in which you have to do things or you have to take a decision, you have what you have given to yourself. And you have to think about that in advance. So everything is connected. In terms of migration, my simple thinking is that migration towards Europe, it's at the same time a sign of something worrying, at the same time also something positive. Worrying because, I mean, people are coming because there is a shrinking demography, labor shortages, etc., etc. But in general terms, the fact that people are running across deserts and oceans to go to Europe and not towards other places is because they know that Europe is the place where they can live better, where there is more freedom, there is more democracy, more respect of human rights. So it's also a sign of success, I would say. And certainly it's not the migration that is producing the reduction of the welfare or the rights of our citizens. On the contrary, they want to benefit of the same things. if there are problems in Europe, is for also internal endogenic, I would say, reasons. So I think we have to be cold-blooded and cold-minded, and we need to build partnership also with partners, countries of origin and transit, because alone we are not going to be far away. But I think we are doing our best. Still, I believe I have more than 25 years of experience within the European Commission. Certainly, it's just an angle, plenty of other angles. And I can see that we are doing increasingly better, but still there are tools of work that are missing. We could have them, but we have not given these tools to ourselves to be more effective on the ground.
Because that would essentially help then translate a lot of the economic benefits that Panu was talking about to the people who are afraid that something is going to go drastically wrong in their lifestyle and in their European standard of living. So, as a final word, because we have to wrap this up, if I can ask each one of you your take on how do you talk to both the migrant communities, the partners, and also to the host country citizens about the cost benefits of this kind of movement that is now pretty much here to stay. Not just Africa to Europe, it's Africa to the Middle East, it's Asia to the Middle East or to Latin America. This is happening worldwide. So at some point, how do we have these conversations? What do we need to say to both the migrants and to also citizens of host countries? I'm going to go back to you to start it all. 25 years of commission work.
I think to the migrant communities that are still outside, I mean to the potential migrants, to the origin countries, we are saying that Europe is a welcoming place, where indeed there are rules, however, and in accordance with these rules, there is place. We always repeat in any meeting with them that the number of people obtaining residence permits and having regular legal pathways into the EU is far more than the number of people found as irregular migrants or with forced returns. So we speak too much about irregular migration towards Europe. There is a lot of legal migration that is happening in front of us, that is not governed, we don't speak enough about this. So Europe is a welcoming place, but has rules, and it needs to be respected. And we frequently see that migrants are eager to follow these legal pathways as soon as they understand, if only they can understand what are the rules to be followed. Internally, it's a work, it's a collective work to be done by governments of the member states, other services of the Commission, and so on and so forth. But I think the message must be that if we control and manage all this is going to produce better results for everyone. The question is not about stopping, it's about governing and using this for the benefits of everyone. And look at your experience. Based on experience, we can improve, or we can make best use. I think most of the citizens in their life have seen a lot of problems connected sometimes with migration, but also a lot of benefits connected also with migration. So we have to know that it's not simple, but there are a lot of positive into that. I mean, we have to be confident in the judgment of the citizens and not create fears more than what they may have already based on their experience.
Trust the citizens' judgment. I love that. Orlane, final word.
Well, I think by now we all understand that we won't be leaving the room with more answers, but maybe with more questions, which I don't think is a bad thing. Also because each answer is very specific. It was said in the previous panels, specificities are such that if we want to tackle the issue, it needs to be localized. The solution for Brussels is not the solution for Charleroi, for instance, simply because there are very strong specificities in each territory, and sometimes 30 kilometers away, the situation is radically different in terms of resources affected, available solutions, etc. So we need to be localized. Migration is an existential issue, I would say. Since we are kids in school, we learn that what defines us, a language, people, and a territory. We know with climate change there are territories that are not livable anymore. We were talking about the Pacific once again, but there are more and more territories on the coastal areas, etc., where people will have to move from. The question again, and as it was said, is how is it going to be managed? Successful migration versus an issue to manage, what makes the difference is management. Again, I reiterate that most people leaving from their place of origin do not do it because they want to. They do it because their perception is such that there are no other alternatives. So we need to work on alternatives, and there are plenty. Sometimes they're not even costly. Maybe just a topic we haven't talked about in this panel much is about disaster risk reduction. We talked about slow onset phenomena, but there are also fast onset ones. Being better prepared means saving money in the longer term. Some analysts even said that $1 invested in preparedness means the equivalent of $7 saved in the active response phase. So yes, money is limited, investments are limited, but we are saving money by actually tackling the phenomenon from before. And I think regular pathways, when it comes to countries of arrival, as we name them, is the way forward. Acknowledging that it can be a win-win phenomenon, addressing labor shortages, making sure that we manage to match the skills, preparing migrants to go when we acknowledge that there is space to receive them, and work with communities in areas of departure to make sure that migration is a choice when there is possibility to remain in place and support these options.
The legal pathway route is probably, I think, at this point, the most saleable one for the political sphere, at least. Ibrahima, final word. Yeah. What should people in Europe or citizens in Europe know when migrants come here? It's not the only home they're looking for.
Yeah, I think it's very complex to summarize and in few words what should be the key takeaways. But for me, what is fundamental is to have a human right-based approach to migration and to migration governance. Because if we check the tragic circumstances with the death of many migrants, for me, we should be very careful in understanding the root causes, because there are new profile of migrants actually. They are not necessarily poor people. They are not necessarily unemployed people. There are people actually who are having decent jobs, but they maybe want to have, upward social or professional mobility, and that's why they wanted to use regular channels, and they were not, given a visa, and then because of this stringent visa and migration policy regime, then they end up using the irregular migration channels. For me, one of the fundamental factors that is constituting a breeding ground of irregular migration, especially from, if you consider international migration from the global source to the global north, is not necessarily poverty, it's this issue of visa. Because smugglers and human traffickers, they take advantage of this stringent visa policy and migration regime to lure, would-be migrants, and then they end up with these tragic circumstances. So it's very important to address these asymmetric relations as when it comes to capital mobility. As long as this capital mobility related challenge is not addressed, you will see increasing irregular migration flows. And now also the contemporary African migration dynamic, especially when it comes to Europe, is also characterized by the increasing attractiveness of African migrants towards, America, United States and Canada. Many African migrants actually who were based in Europe, they end up going to Canada and the US. And when they go there, they have excellent working conditions, and they were here engineers, they were here medical doctors, but they face a lot of challenges in the labor market. And when they go to the US, they thrive intellectually and professionally. So it means that stringent visa and migration policy regime are also undermining, the economic viability of many European countries.
And that's also
Yes.
something that needs to be taken into consideration if
Yes.
that might require a little bit of a rethink in how we look at the legal routes.
Yeah.
So Panu, the last word is yours. We need to adapt. We don't know the numbers of adaptation kind of migrants to Europe. What do we need to do at this point to make this palatable politically and to businesses that might look at this as a talent pool?
I think that the key point here and a key opportunity to answer this question is to point out the demographic divergence. Then it comes to European countries. All European countries are facing a declining labor force in the absence of migration and will face increasingly labor shortages. While in the North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East, the challenge is opposite. So it is about youth bulge and lack of job opportunities. So if we succeed in bringing the supply and demand together, there are potential for very big gains. That would require regular migration, that would require having legal job opportunities to come to work in Europe, and that is something that I would say would really allow both sides to gain. Then it comes to the irregular migration. That is a challenge because there could be more people who would like to come than European countries are willing to accept. And that means that not everybody can come. But for example, Germany had agreed 2015 with West Balkan countries a rule that allowed people to apply, even without formal qualification, to apply for work visas to Germany, provided that they did it from their home countries. And that resulted in a dramatic decrease in the number of people who had applied for asylum with pretty much zero chances of being accepted. So once they had a legal pathway, they used that. And something similar with North African countries, Sub-Saharan African countries, would be my suggestion for the way forward.
On that note, hopefully, are there any politicians in the room? I'm guessing not. But I think that is the storyline that we need to kind of work on. How do we get the legal routes to work better for both the migrant countries and the partner countries, as Francesco, you said, and also the host countries, so that it is not used as some kind of boogeyman story going down the road, and political will can stick behind it. On that note, thank you all very, very much. I have to end this panel on time, which is why we can't open it up to all of you, but grab them on the way out. Give them a round of applause. Thank you all very much for joining us. And may I hand this back to Spuz.
Thank you, Maithreyi. We are coming to the end of this conference. I would like to, I am not going to try to summarize this conference, don't worry, but I'd like to share a few thoughts about what we've seen here. When I arrived this morning, my prior was, adaptation is probably more efficient or more effective than mitigation, because if you adapt to climate change as an individual or as a country, you bear the cost, but you also get the full benefit of adapting. Whereas if you mitigate, as we all know, you bear the full cost, but you contribute to a global public good, and the benefit accrues to the whole world. And given this, the prediction of standard economics, that's what you learn in the first 3 months. If you study economics, the prediction is mitigation will not happen. Yes, adaptation will happen. Now, I think what, the first thing the keynote taught us was that, there are these words, preparedness and resilience, which I really like. I think it's not really a substitute for adaptation, but it highlights the active side and the promise of adaptation strategies, which is nice. I think what the panels have shown is that, yes, adaptation does work, but it also has its frictions and limitations, which can sometimes be quite serious. We've heard that there are people in the world, yes, who would like to adapt, but they don't have the means. You know, they live in a place they lack the resources, and they just don't have the means to adapt. We've heard that some people would like to innovate, yes, but innovation doesn't work all too well either, because there are all kinds of positive externalities when innovating, or again, people don't have the resources to invest, they don't have the buffer, as Maria mentioned, to take risks. And you know, if you can't take risks, if you don't have the resources, it's difficult to really invest in innovation and do what's necessary. Now, I think the good news is these are all market frictions we know from other markets. And there are ways of dealing with them. Now, for that reason, I think in this overall slightly dystopian outlook about climate change, adaptation is a positive aspect. I think it should not distract from the fact that we need global coordination for mitigation to really fight climate change. But at the same time, I think what it does is tell us, you know, if this global coordination doesn't work or doesn't work very well, we are not entirely helpless. You know, we can do things, we can try adapt, we can help people to adapt, and I think that's a positive perspective in this rather gloomy subject. Okay, let me conclude by thanking all those who have made this conference possible. First of all, I would like to thank Maithreyi for really a fabulous moderation, and I think this deserves some applause. Thank you, Maithreyi. It was a pleasure to listen to you. I would like to thank all panelists, the keynote speaker. I would like to thank the Bavarian representation and the Gates Foundation for the support. I would like to thank the CESifo and the IFO team for the organization in the background. And last but not least, I'd like to thank all of you for being here, for participating in the debate. It's been a great exchange, and I hope you will stay interested in our activities. You see our publications here. We will keep you posted. The next EconPol publication, not conference, but publication, will be about defense. So you know, from time to time, you should take a look at our homepage and follow our activities. And I hope to see you, of course, at the next EconPol conference, possibly in this room. So have a very safe trip home. Thanks for being here, and have a nice evening. Thank you.